I'm Jeff Ward, and the only agenda here is to make you think. Well, the title of the story, it's not like we haven't had this conversation, for the better part of 25 years. What to do about the cost of living in Austin, how to fix it. City council after mayor has said, I'm going to fix that, I'm going to fix that. Well, Business Insider today, the headline reads, How Austin Slashed Home Prices. Most cities gripe about the soaring cost of home ownership. Austin decided to fix it. James Rodriguez has written a piece for Business Insider. He happens to also be an Austinite as well. That's two of us, two out of, a couple million, I guess, James. Okay, so there's a bunch here. We'll try not to sound like the old get off my lawn Austin guys, but is the gold rush over in Austin?
I think we are seeing it not completely over, but what we're seeing is that home prices are down from their peak. Now, they're still up a lot since 2019, but I think you've seen a lot of that enthusiasm for the Austin market faded. You know, when I talk to real estate agents now, they talk about homes sitting on the market longer. I think sellers are kind of coming to terms with this isn't the golden days of 2021 and 2022 when the market was at its peak. And economists and housing experts really describe Austin now as sort of a success story in reeling in home prices a little bit from that peak. Again, it's not a perfect market, but those kind of crazy, frenzied gold rush days, I think, are behind us, at least for now.
So, I don't know how many different times through the years I've said, how to fix the cost of living in Austin, and that is supply and demand. So is that what is happening here now?
Yeah, it really is Econ 101, and I saw a crazy stat recently from this company, Parcel Labs, that tracks housing data around the country, and Austin grew its housing supply by more than 8% between 2020, the start of the pandemic, to today. And that's a really sizable, it's almost a colossal feat when you think about the size of Austin. And, Austin wasn't a small place in 2019. So to grow the housing stock by that much, and that's to say nothing of the 40,000 more or less apartments that have also come online during that period. So that's just a lot of new homes. And when you see that much supply come in, we see demand pulled back a little bit because of higher mortgage rates as well. That combination really does help reel in housing prices.
Now, does local government, I joked earlier that, every city council that I can think of, since 2000 probably has said, we've got to fix this. We've got to fix this. I'm the person to fix it. Does local government get any credit?
I think they do get some credit here. I think one thing to make really clear is this analysis is for the entire Austin metro. It's not just for the city of Austin specifically.
Right.
I think you have seen local government take steps to, expand zoning to make it easier to build multiple housing units in places that might have only allowed single-family homes before. I think Austin City Council specifically is regarded, just in the grand scheme of the rest of the country, as one of the more kind of pro-housing development city councils right now. But I think also when you look across the Sun Belt, that lower half of the U.S., cities that are growing quickly in that part of the country, they've typically just been more permissive of growth. So if a developer wants to build something, it's a lot easier to jump through all the hoops than it is in a place like San Francisco or New York, where I'm based right now. And so that really does make a difference in terms of, and that's something that, housing policy people talk about a lot, is actually just enabling that supply to come in, enabling developers to do what they do best, which is build. And then you see some of the effects now. Again, is the housing market perfect today? No, but it's a lot better than it was when, prices were kind of seemed like they were spiraling out of control.
Well, this is certainly not my expertise, but I'm just wondering if this perfect storm of expensive mortgages isn't a giant problem. In other words, people that moved here during the pandemic, shortly after the pandemic, are buying houses that are, let's just make it up, $550 to $650 to $750, and now they've come down. The real, I guess this is the right term, the real value is, $350. They're carrying mortgages on these really expensive houses now.
I think we definitely are seeing some short-term pain, and I think it's to put some of these numbers into context. When you look at the Austin metro, home prices are down if you look at the Freddie Mac home price index, down about 4% year over year. And you think back to 2019, home prices are still up about 45% from that period. So, if you bought at the peak, are you feeling some short-term pain right now with mortgage rates higher and home prices down a little bit? Yes, but this isn't this isn't really that huge bust that I think people are always worried about when they think back to 2008. It's not to that level. You do see some pretty sizable price cuts. Now, if you look on Zillow, you can see some of these price cuts. And so I think a lot of it is sellers just really, coming to terms with that this isn't the kind of just frenzied market that they knew a couple years ago.
Talking to James Rodriguez of Business Insider. But, is this really a story about the suburbs, and the closer you get to downtown Austin, it's a completely different world? Because I have a weird take on the city of Austin, and that is the closer you get to downtown, the more Austin, the city of Austin, demand may be down, but it's not demand being down among the ultra rich. It's almost like a city that's turning into a place where the only people that live in the city itself are ultra rich.
I think that's absolutely a concern. And when you look at, and you're right about that point of a lot of this growth happening in the suburbs where there is space to build outward. At the same time, you have seen the city, developers within the city deliver a huge number of apartments, which, helps with rents. I think it makes it more affordable to live closer to the city. But again, I think that's an issue that Austin, leaders and developers still have to think a lot about is, how do you avoid becoming this city that's a playground for the rich almost? And that was a big concern of mine, even just watching it. I moved out of Austin back in 2018, but even just watching the housing market from afar, I think that's a concern of becoming a San Francisco. But then again, you look at the number of housing units that they built, that city built over the same time, 2020 to 2024, and they grew their housing stock by 1% and had about 14,000 new units compared to Austin's 76,000 new for sale units. So that's a huge gap, and I think an example of what Austin has been better at than some of these places that you might look at as an example of what you don't want Austin's housing.
But is the fear that's been hanging out there? I go back to Kirk Watson is now the mayor of Austin again, but I remember him saying something during his first term a long time ago, and that is, he was advocating a livable wage and stuff like that. But the concern was if you teach school, you are a firefighter, you wait tables, you tend bar, you can't live anywhere near downtown Austin. And it just seems as if that's even a greater issue. I mean, that's got to be. I mean, if you have a restaurant in somewhat central Austin, it can't be easy to have people that live close by.
I think that's absolutely a huge concern right now, and I think that's why some people have been encouraged by the city council's moves to, look at zoning laws and how can we build more units on a lot that before might have only allowed for a single family home. How can we enable apartment units to have just one stair instead of two? That's a big conversation right now that could actually make it easier to build some of that referred to as missing middle housing. Not quite this gargantuan apartment complex, but it's not a single family home. It's somewhere in the middle. And I think that's where a lot of the policy stuff will come in. And, I think that's a huge challenge for whoever is in leadership to work on that issue, because it's not an easy fix. At the same time, though, I think you look at the timetable of these things between when you have a zoning law enacted and then when it takes time for the developers to actually come in and build that kind of housing, there is a lag there as well. So I think part of the issue is that some of these changes haven't been framed in terms of, okay, you're going to have to maybe wait a little bit. And I think it's fair for people to demand change now because it is a real issue for Austin.
So what is a reasonable, we used to always compare Austin to Silicon Valley and all that stuff. Well, what is where Austin is now? What is a reasonable comparison around the country?
That is a great question. I think you look at other growing cities in the Sun Belt, and Austin stands out as a place that has seen a lot of growth, a lot of really really fast population growth, and one of the biggest run-ups in prices. I think when you look at Silicon Valley, and I focus a lot in this article on San Francisco because you think of it as a place that attracted a lot of jobs, as a place that had a lot of natural beauty where people really wanted to live, and just really dragged its heels and didn't build the housing that people were demanding. And so I think that's still an apt comparison when you look at, okay, what are the possibilities here? What are we trying to avoid? I think that's still something that we should be thinking about as a place that was a place where people wanted to live, but they simply couldn't because of these high prices that I talk about in the story.
So does movement into the city of Austin, is it slow? Is it near zero? It's the suburbs that have blown up. What's the comparison between inner city versus suburban areas?
Well, we did see migration to Austin slow considerably, and so when you look at Travis County, you actually had between July 2022 and July 2023, which were the latest numbers that I was looking at, you had more people moving out of Travis County than moving in for the first time in 2 decades.
Yeah.
So, we've seen some of that. The pendulum was swinging one direction, now it's swinging the other. We see a lot of people departing for the suburbs. They're departing for cheaper places like San Antonio. I was actually looking at this stat that 20% of new San Antonians in 2022 had moved from Austin.
Wow.
So I think that shows that people are really looking for affordability right now. And like I said, you've seen home prices come down in the Austin metro, but at the same time, mortgage rates have gone up. So the average person is looking at paying potentially hundreds of dollars more each month for the same sticker price on a home, just with the mortgage rates increasing. So affordability, people talk about Austin as a success story in terms of building all of these homes, and that's great, but it's still a huge issue for the city, for the surrounding area, and I think that's not going away. It's still a place where people want to live, where people want to work, and you do see, I think, that migration that I mentioned, I think a lot of that has to do with affordability. You see people seeking out more affordable places to live.
Yeah, I've wondered when I first saw that number. I mean, I don't ever remember that number. If that was the tipping point, is that expected to continue? In other words, more people are moving out than moving in. Is that expected to continue?
That's a great question that I would honestly need to talk to Austin's demographer more to get a sense of. I think you do kind of naturally see with all the affordability changes in Austin. I think when you see people who moved in maybe early on in the pandemic, there's kind of more of a return to office shift right now. People may have made these changes early in the pandemic when life was very different, and then now deciding, okay, wait, I need to reevaluate again. So I certainly see the pendulum swinging back in certain respects, but I think when I talk to people now, they still see a bright future for Austin long term in terms of a place where people want to live and where companies want to be located. So, I think it's kind of a short-term pullback, but I don't see it as necessarily Austin just bleeding residents for years to come.
You since you grew up here as well, you know this. I mean, I run on the trail, and I probably every other day I count the number of cranes downtown. So I'm always amazed. Wait a second, more people are moving out than moving in, yet I count no less than 8 or 9 cranes throwing up high rises, of which a 1-bedroom would cost you, close to $1 million. Who is that?
Well, I think you have a lot of apartments in there too, but also this stuff just happens on a lag, and I think that's one of the frustrating parts of when you talk about supply and demand in real estate is for the longest time early in the pandemic when prices were really, it felt like they were spiraling out of control. You had all of this work going on in the background of developers getting land ready and getting permits in place and doing all of these things to build homes, and now we're seeing those actually hitting the market, and it's at a time when things have slowed down because of mortgage rates going up, interest rates going up. It's expensive to borrow money for everything now. And then you have some of that migration pullback because of the prices, and also just because, people aren't making these radical shifts in their life the way that they were earlier in the pandemic. And so it does kind of make for an odd scene when you see, prices down in Austin, rents down in Austin, and yet all of these cranes are still working on new housing units. And I think it just takes time to kind of find that equilibrium and see where prices and rents go. And ultimately, I think it is weird to see things happen on a lag like that.
So is that the bust or potential busts, these high-end high rises?
I think what you see now is there definitely will be some short-term pain. I think you talk to developers right now who are eager to, even homes in the area, homes that they might have started a couple of years ago, who they're not able to sell them for the price that they got. You see rents down. I think the question is where is the floor, right? And you do see different opinions on that. But I think it is tough to say. I think if people could kind of pinpoint where the floor was, there would be a flood of people trying to get in and at the bottom here. But ultimately, when I talked to the economists and housing experts that I spoke to for this story, they didn't see the makings of a 2008 style bust or this glut of empty units. I think ultimately you are going to try to see those filled. And could prices go down further? Absolutely. Could they? But in terms of a Great Recession style bust, nobody that I spoke to was really pointing in that direction.
Okay, so the number that goes out, you mentioned San Antonio. What are where are Austinites going?
Yeah, I think you see a lot of that movement to the suburbs. I did mention San Antonio. I think those were kind of the two ones that really stood out to me as I was writing the story. And again, it's the suburbs are where a lot of this housing development was happening. And if somebody wants to buy a single family home, they're not doing it super close to downtown anymore, at least not at an affordable price. So you look out to the suburbs, and I think that's where you've seen a lot of the growth.
The people that are still coming in, where has that changed over time?
That's a great question as well. For this story, I wasn't focusing a ton on the profile of who's coming in at the moment, but I definitely think if you're looking compared to, say, 2019, when again, Austin was one of the fastest, it was the fastest growing large metro between 2010 and 2020, and you saw the population grow by a third. The profile of the person moving in at that time, I have to imagine is different than the profile of the person who's moving in today and can afford some of these prices that, again, are up 45% from pre-pandemic. So even though we've seen them go down a little bit, they're up something like 56% at one point, according to Zillow. But I have to imagine that the profile is different than it was 2020.
Well, I always use my frame of reference, as simple as it is. Over time, at the park with my kids, who do I run into? And for a long time, of course, it was, we moved here from the Bay Area. Then it noticeably, to me at least, it noticeably switched to there's a lot of people you run into from the East Coast. Mm-hmm. I don't know what it is now. I don't know where. I mean, it wasn't what you would expect. It wasn't everybody's from Dallas and Houston. It was, for a while there, the joke, of course, was everybody's from the Bay Area, and then that changed. Is that still the case?
Absolutely, and I think California, when you think about Austin's calling card was always, even with the affordability challenges, it's a lot cheaper than the coast, right? So if you're somebody who's living in an expensive place like New York City or the Bay or Southern California, it looks a lot more attractive, especially when you look at taxes and home prices and things like that. And so that equation has changed somewhat. And, another interesting thing too is, you think about California moving in, and it turns out the summers are really hot, right? I think that's something, more than one person mentioned that to me, real estate agents and housing people that I spoke with, is people might have moved early on in the pandemic and then realized, wow, this weather was not what I was expecting. And so, I think that's where you see a little bit of the pullback as well. And, maybe somebody who's looking to sell after a few years in Austin. And even I was visiting Austin while I was working on this story and heard a couple people behind me at a coffee shop talking about where are you from? California. Where are you from? Also California. So I think, I mean, that's, and they had moved somewhat recently. So I think that's something that is very much still a thing, just because the relative attractiveness of Austin compared to some of these coastal places, I think endures.
So what is, I mean, is Austin on a back to work trajectory? I mean, I remember Michael Dell probably during the pandemic famously said, our expectation is in the future that, maybe half the workforce will be coming into the office regularly. And it turns out now we're looking at it, it's not the case. So what is going back to the office look like for Austin?
I can't speak entirely for Austin specifically, but I think in general, it does kind of feel like the pendulum is swinging back toward at least some in-office requirement, maybe not 5 days a week, which we saw Amazon announce starting in January 2025, they're going to be requiring corporate employees to be in the office 5 days a week. I think that's at the extreme end, but I think it is kind of a sign of, early on in the pandemic, think back to when all these companies were making these announcements, we're going to be this fully remote company. And there was a lot of the big players that made these announcements and kind of provided the cover for smaller companies to follow that wave. So I do think when you see a big company like Amazon making that kind of announcement, I think it does speak a lot to the climate right now when employers feel like they have more power, when it's, if you're a white collar employee, it's a harder job market than it was earlier on in the pandemic, and companies don't have to do as much to keep employees, working there. So I think you have to look at these big companies and see the kinds of policies that they're making. And I think that does kind of set the tone for a lot of these smaller companies to then potentially follow suit. Maybe not 5 days a week, but I think that's something that a lot of companies are talking about right now is
I wonder,
more people.
I mean, you knew this growing up here. It used to be the topic of the day as Austin was exploding was, oh my gosh, traffic's a nightmare. It's a city built, we're 30 years behind probably in infrastructure. It's a running joke, running complaint every single day. I remember, can't remember which mayor it was. He said to me one time, I think it was Will Wynn during his time. He had this bizarre phrase. He goes, traffic is my legacy. And then, then Lee Leffingwell comes along and then he's going to fix traffic. And then that bond initiative for the rail failed miserably. And all of a sudden the pandemic comes and we don't talk about traffic again. So people go back to work. Is traffic the big issue of the day in Austin again?
I think it absolutely should be, especially when you think of, again, what I'm writing about in this story is all of this growth in the suburbs. And if people are going to be having to go into the office, that's a big issue. I think a lot of people made these decisions, again, early on in the pandemic, thinking, oh, I can be remote now. I can maybe move farther out. I can move to a place that isn't anywhere near an office, and making these housing decisions based on that. And I think you are going to see some pullback from that. I think you're seeing companies trying to get more employees back to the office, and I think that's going to force a lot of people to be thinking about commutes and traffic and all these things that they might not have had to worry about for a while now. And I do think that's going to be a big issue in the future. Yeah,
I wonder if trains are going to come up again. I wonder if it'll be the hot button issue of the day all over again.
I wonder that too, especially, again, with the growth of the suburbs.
Yeah.
How can we get people into downtown? I can absolutely see that being an issue.
Yeah. Well, it's interesting. I can live it all. I know exactly everything you're talking about. We all get to see it. It's good work, James. Good talking to you.
Thanks so much.